In March 2020, the Tyne Theatre Opera House, along with all other theatres, cinemas and concert halls in the UK, were forced to lock down. That meant that many of the shows that were scheduled were cancelled, and others have been transferred to dates later in the year or next year. Following a recognised theatre tradition, as the theatre went dark, we installed what is called a ghost light. The reasons for the ghost light are two, one sentimental and the other practical. The sentimental reason is when the theatre is dark, the ghost light keeps the ghosts in the theatre sweet. The practical reason is that when staff come into the theatre, when it's completely dark, there is some light to see the way around, stops them bumping into things or falling off the stage. We had to stop our tours, but we thought we'd take advantage of the lockdown to show you parts of the Tyne Theatre and Opera House that you can't normally get to see. So welcome to the Tyne Theatre and Opera House Ghostlight Tour. Welcome. I'm standing in the foyer of the Tyne Theatre and Opera House, which opened in 1867. The idea for establishing the Opera House was that of Joseph Cowan, the son of Sir Joseph Cowan, who was the Member of Parliament for Newcastle. Joseph Cowan Jr. felt that the population at the west end of Newcastle needed their own theatre, and for some years he tried to get planning permission for it, using George Stanley, who was a local theatre manager, to put the planning permission in. Eventually he got it through, and George Stanley was to be his theatre director. All he needed now was an architect, and he selected William Parnell, who had done some work locally. He designed parts of the St Nicholas buildings in Newcastle, but this was his first theatre, in fact his only theatre. And now we're going to go into the auditorium and we'll look and see what William Parnell had produced to make this beautiful theatre and opera house. When the Tyne Theatre opened in 1867, this area at the back was called the Pit. Up to the beginning of the 19th century, the whole of the ground floor in front of the stage was called the Pit, and it was a very noisy and active area, lots was going on. Here is a post which signifies the junction between the pit, which were the cheapest seats apart from the gallery, and the front stalls. So imagine the barrier through here, this side of the barrier, 1 shilling, this side of the barrier, 4 shillings, reserved, or 3 shillings if you chance it for unreserved. Everyone had their place and their entrances and their exits, and if you were coming to sit in the stalls, you would come through this door here and not through the pit. And that will enable you to come across to your seat. Beneath where I am standing is the orchestra pit for the Tyne Theatre and Opera House. And if we need to have an orchestra in, the rostra are taken out and the floor goes down about 18 inches. And that's sufficient for people sitting in the front stalls, not to have the orchestra in their way. If we have a big opera with a large orchestra, then we can take out about 4 rows of seats, pick up more orchestra, and that enables us to accommodate that many extra people. This is probably a good place to indicate that the stage has a slope on it. That slope is called a rake, and that matched with a slope in the auditorium helps to improve the sight lines for particularly people sitting in the stalls. The sight lines generally in the theatre from all of the galleries are extremely good. Now we do have pillars, but they're slim pillars, and if we're booking seats, you'll always be told that if there is a restricted view. But the acoustics and the sight lines are absolutely excellent, both for theatre and for opera. And from here we get the actor's view of the auditorium. William Parnell only designed one theatre, and didn't he make a wonderful job of it? It amazed the audience at the time, and it still amazes me today. When it opened, it took 3,000 people. 3,000. That was 1,100 in the gallery, 900 on the upper circle, the dress circle and the boxes, and a further 1,000 in the stalls and the pit. Today, we are licensed for 1,100 people. So you can imagine how cramped and packed in that was. And if you look at the programs those days, they started maybe at 7 o'clock, 7:30, and it went on and people came out at midnight. 3,000 people packed in here all day. You can imagine it. And smoking, and some drinking. Quite a place. The auditorium itself was lit partly by gas, well, entirely by gas, but in the centre of the ceiling was the sun burner. The sun burner had a dual purpose. Not only did it light the auditorium, but it also acted as a heat exchanger, because the heat from the auditorium went up past the sun burner, out through a chimney into the night air, and cooler air was coming in lower down the auditorium. And that's the way in which the atmosphere was, to some extent, made more endurable. But people loved to go to the theatre and had a great time, and full houses were absolutely terrific. Don't you just love it? So here we are, up the steps from the special door in Thornton Street, and here we are at the door of the box office for the gallery. And you paid for the gallery, and here you would pay your 6pence, and in exchange for this you would get a token. No tickets in those days, you get a token instead. If you're in the pit as well, you get a different kind of token, but it has a pit on it. And you took it up the stairs, and when you got to the level at the top, you'd hand it over, and the hole in the middle of it is so that the person upstairs can put them on the string and they all can be counted and taken up at the end of the day. So there we are, that's in my hand, off we go. Here we are in the Grand Circle, the best seats in the house. 4 shillings for reserved, 3 shillings for unreserved in 1867. A little bit more than that now, but they really are the best seats, and don't let anyone tell you differently. We can see from here a good view of the stage, but you can see the rake in the circle of the Grand Circle and the Upper Circle. Worth mentioning that I can see on the Upper Circle there are names of playwrights, and on the Grand Circle there are the names of composers. Now, a sharp member of one of our tours pointed out that Oscar Wilde's name is there as one of the playwrights, and that name couldn't have been there in 1867. Because Oscar Wilde at that time was only 13. But every theatre has its mysteries, and all of the guides like exploring the history and making sure that we can separate the folk tales from the truth. So what you're getting today will be the truth, of course. So a very popular place to sit. People might think the boxes are the best places to sit. Very shortly we'll go into one of the boxes and we can see how much that is ideally the place to sit, whether it isn't. So we'll go off to a box. We're now sitting in one of the Tyne Theatre's boxes. When the Tyne Theatre originally opened, there were 4 boxes on either side, one right up at the gallery level, and when we look at that you think you wouldn't see a great deal of the stage from where you are up there, which probably accounts for why it's been blocked off rather ornately. There are 2 other boxes below them, and then at orchestra stalls level there was also a box each on either side, and they were taken out many years ago to make more space for seating. The boxes are very comfortable, and you might think, are they not also the best seats in the house? But in fact, the boxes weren't really made for you to see the show, but they were there for you to be seen. And there's a slight angle to the boxes, which shows that they're angled more towards the audience rather than the stage. And you can imagine with the sunburner light on throughout the performance, shining out, and if you're here with your medals and your ladies in the box with you, with their diamantes and their necklaces, you're all shining, and it'll make quite a strong impression on the audience, and they'll know who is there in the boxes. And we'll have a look at the moment and just see who is in the box opposite this one. I think I've seen him somewhere before, just can't remember where it was. There's one thing very special about this box, special because it's unique to this particular box. It also has its own cloakroom and toilet, and also its own bar. And we're going to go look at that right now. And here we are in the stage bar. Ideal for the manager of the theatre to entertain special guests, and of course people who are in the box taking the opportunity to have a rest during the intervals. From this room we can go backstage, and that's where we're going right now. When the Tyne Theatre and Opera House opened in 1867, it was lit entirely by gas. Gaslight in theatres have been in operation for 50 years, so the whole business had been well developed at this time. I'll tell you briefly about how the gas lights were. Where I'm standing here at the edge of the stage would have been the gas footlights. In the wings there would have been ladders with gas lamps on, with tubes connecting them, and then above the stage there would be battens with gas on as well, and they would be the main sources of the gas light. Now, from the audience's point of view, it looks as though the stage is completely flat and solid, but in fact there are a number of traps underneath, and we're going to take a look at each of those in turn, starting with my favourite, which is the demon trap. Yes, the demon trap, my favourite trap. This is where Abanazar, King Rat, all the wicked people from pantomime will emerge and frighten all the children in the house. Always on the left, stage left, because it goes back to the medieval mystery plays. Hell's Mouth was always on the left. Here we were. On the other side of the stage is the fairy trap. Fairy will come eventually and will put everything right, so you can understand on the right as opposed to the sinister side. In between the two, there's what we call the grave trap or the Hamlet trap, which is much wider than these traps, but enables the stage to be lowered behind so that it can be used as a grave or for other theatrical purposes. Now that arrangement is quite common for a lot of theatres, but what makes the Tyne Theatre and Opera House rather special is what I'm going to show you now. Over the years, all theatres developed and got larger and larger, and the audiences expected more and more for each attendance. The scenery for a long time was much the same. It would be in the wings, borders above, and then later the development of flying scenery, and in this theatre we have fly lines on both sides. Originally there were about 70. On stage left, that side, is what we call the hemp gallery, and all the lifting was done through hemp ropes. To meet the needs of more modern get in and get out, we now have counterweighted fly lines which can be moved by one person to make those changes. So that's bringing us up to date. The theatres in the Victorian era, the managers were looking for more and more ways of making exciting performances for their audience. And the stage carpenters and the machinists were the people who helped to develop the system that make that happen. And what is particularly special about the Tyne Theatre and Opera House is it's one of very few theatres that have what is called the English modular stage. And I'll tell you a little bit more about this. Where I'm standing is what is called a bridge. And the theatre bridge is able to be brought up through the stage to, if necessary, up to about this level. And to achieve that, first of all, the stage opens and then from the machinery underneath it's be able to lift it up. And we have actually 4 sets of bridges at the Tyne Theatre, which was about the standard for Victorian theatres. And in front of the bridges, because the bridge was a kind of trestle arrangement, and therefore if you're in the audience you could see underneath it, you'd have a piece of scenery that came up in front of the bridge, and that would block out what you could see upstage. But it also would be part of the scenery, so it would have painted on it maybe a wall, it could be sea, it could be grassland, it could be all sorts of countryside. And we have 2 of those, because while the scene was playing, stage people below the stage were loading the second slope, as they're called, to bring it up to the slot. So when the time came for the change of scene, it was fairly easy to lower one and lower the other, and raise the other one, and at the same time the bridges might be going up and down. The theatre managers of those times were always looking for new exciting stories that they could tell, stories that involved earthquakes. There was a play called The Spanish Armada, which was performed at the Tyne Theatre, had transferred from the Drury Lane Theatre, including the sinking of the fire ships. And also in the London stage, there were train crashes, there were waterfalls, there were riots, and even live horse racing. Yes, horse racing on the stage here. In one year in particular, there was the winner of the Grand National took part in this. And we can show you through some old pictures, not of the Tyne Theatre, but another theatre, how that was all achieved. So just to explain, 4 treadmills mounted on the bridges under the stage. Horses are on them, and when the race starts, the treadmills go round, the horses gallop. And it's a predetermined finish. At the back of this picture, you can see a roll of some kind, and in fact that is a panorama that contains the scenery, so as the horses are galloping along, not going anywhere, and in fact the scenery will be going by, a bit like Scooby-Doo, somebody said to me the other day, until the end of the race. But there was great admiration, and some local person said the Grand National was staged so wonderfully it did credit to the town moor in Newcastle. But how was all this achieved? We're now going to go under the stage and see how it was all made to happen. So this is the engine room. This is where it all happens. We talked about what happens on stage, but this is how it's all achieved. We talked about the bridges and the slopes. And here on my left is the bridge, and here are the slots where the 2 slopes go under. Let's look at the bridge. At the top there's a T-shaped handle, which we call a paddle, and by flipping that upwards, the sliders on the stage drop down onto a groove, and then by pulling on this rope, they can be slid off into the wings right away. That happens both sides of the stage, so the whole of the stage is open, and that enables the stage crew winding away on the windlasses to raise the bridge. This already is up at the full height, but then it can go up to a metre and a half above the stage level as well, and that creates the effect. And it can have props on it, furniture on it, it can have singers on it as well, all part of the effect. And bearing in mind that this can be done at 4 different levels with the 4 different bridges that we have. The arrangements with the slopes is exactly the same. There are two of them. Just to remind you that there are two, because while one is up in front of the bridge, which you can see is all open, people down here can be loading the next piece of scenery for that. So when the queue comes, one lot of scenery goes down, the other one goes up. Very quickly achieved. And they're wound up from the other end. This is the prop side of the stage, and that is opposite props, that's stage right. And that's how that effect is achieved. And after that, we're going to look at the demon trap and how that operates. And here we are under the demon trap. Demon trap up here, 22 inches square. Seems to be the common measurement across the United Kingdom. And this is the mechanism that works with the trapdoor. The actor or actress is weighed to make sure the counterweights are loaded to help a smooth entrance onto the stage. And when they're ready, they'll hop up on here, and stagehand on either side waiting for the cue. Another one will open the trap, and on the cue pull, and the trap will rise with the actor and actress on it, and they hop off on stage, and then the trap is closed. And it does also work the other way around, so somebody can disappear down through the trap, and that's an effective effect as well. At the other side of the stage is the fairy trap, which operates in exactly the same way as the demon trap. And in between the two, in the middle, is the grave trap or the Hamlet trap, which works a bit more like the bridges than it does the demon and fairy traps, but the Hamlet trap doesn't rise above stage level. And instead of burly stagehands operating it, it's managed on a windlass that winds it up or winds it down to the appropriate level. Well, we've talked about the scenery, we've talked about the way the stage can go up and down. What else was needed for those great spectacular events? Well, smoke and fire. The Victorians loved coloured flames, coloured fire. Red fire and green fire were the most popular of all. But also you needed to create the sound of a thunder as part of the roaring and stirring. One way of doing that was to have what's called a thunder sheet. That's a large metal sheet with a handle on the end, and you just rattle it like that, and it goes a bit like a very large wobble board. But another device that came into fashion was something called the thunder run. Thunder run goes way back, earlier than the Tyne Theatre Opera House. And how that achieved its effect, and happened to have one we recreated. Here we have our thunder run, which was on one of the hemp bridges, but is now brought down here so we can demonstrate it more easily. These are the original hoops, I hasten to say, and the effect is created by loading a cannonball, maybe 36 pounds worth of cannonball, at the top, and it rolls down the whole of the run. And as you will hear, it makes a stupendous effect, no doubt about that whatsoever. The Bristol Old Vic, when it celebrated its 250th anniversary, had their thunder run recreated, re-established. And their thunder run, their ball goes round the galleries. So you actually get a surround around effect at the Bristol Old Vic. But this is frighteningly loud and all part of the great illusion of Victorian spectacular theatre. Well, we've seen the auditorium, we've been on stage, we've been under the stage. What about the actors? What happened to them? Well, I'm sitting in one of the two star dressing rooms, dressing room 1 and dressing room 2. We have 11 dressing rooms in the Tyne Theatre and Opera House. Most of the other actors would be on the dressing rooms on the middle floor, and right at the top of the house we do actually have the ballet dressing room. So it's a long way down the stairs to the stage from the ballet dressing room. Just remember those Hollywood films when you saw the chorus girls coming down the stairs? Well, that would be just the same back in those days in the Tyne Theatre and Opera House. In between the dressing rooms on this floor is in fact the green room, and the green room is where the actors can rest, either waiting to go on or after they've been on. And from the star dressing rooms 1 and 2, it's just a short walk down a corridor that takes you direct onto the stage, and that is what you get if you're a star. That is our dressing rooms. So much to see, so much more to learn. We haven't touched on the 50 plus years that the Tyne Theatre was the Stoll Picture House. The threat of closure, the battle to save the Stoll, and then eventually the successful reopening of the Tyne Theatre and Opera House. We hope that you'll be able to come and see us again and do the full tour when we're open again, when you'll hear more about the people who have made this particular theatre the success that it is. The successful independent theatre, for the Tyne Theatre doesn't receive any Arts Council or other funding. So if you liked this tour, then I invite you to look at the website, the details coming up shortly, and perhaps to make a donation to the Ghost Light Tour. Thank you very much for your time, and we hope to see you again before too very long.